Early morning, the sun is just beginning to rise above the horizon, filling the streets with a soft light. The small town seems not yet fully awake, and only a few passers-by hurry about their business. The streets are quiet, and for most people, this morning is no different from any other. But for little Jason, today has already been difficult. Jason, a black boy about 11 years old, skinny but brave, holds a carefully folded prescription in his hands. He's wearing a warm sweatshirt that's a bit too big, likely handed down from an older brother or his dad. He presses the paper tightly to his chest, feeling a knot of anxiety in his stomach but not daring to let it go. After all, this paper is his mother's only hope. His mother has been bedridden for several days. Jason first heard her coughing at night, then saw her forehead grow hot as the cough turned into a hoarse, broken wheeze. Yesterday, she couldn't even sit up in bed, and her face was so pale that Jason was truly frightened. His dad had told him to go get the medicine in the morning, but today, his dad had to leave town for work, entrusting this important task to his son. When Jason enters the pharmacy, a wave of nervousness sweeps over him. The familiar, ordinary place suddenly feels foreign. Long rows of medicines, jars, and boxes are neatly arranged on the shelves, and behind the counter stands a tall woman, the new pharmacist, Miss White. He hardly knows her, as she only started working at the pharmacy a few weeks ago, and they have barely crossed paths. Miss White is a middle-aged woman with straight blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. She's wearing a white coat that accentuates her serious, cold appearance. She's busy with something at the counter and doesn't immediately notice Jason. But when she does, her expression quickly shifts to a guarded, disapproving look, as though she's dealing with an unwelcome stranger in her space. "Can I help you?" Her voice is formal but cold. She speaks slowly, as though weighing each word. Jason quietly approaches the counter and hands her the prescription, carefully smoothing it out with trembling fingers. He feels uncomfortable under her piercing gaze, but he gathers the courage and, stammering, says, "I need this. For my mom. She's sick." Miss White doesn't rush to take the prescription. She looks at the piece of paper, then at the boy, her gaze growing colder, and her face seems to tighten slightly. She looks as if she's deliberating whether she should even bother with this customer. "Where's your mom? Why didn't she come for the medicine herself?" Her question is sharp, even cutting. There's not just distrust in her voice, but a faint note of disdain. Jason struggles to hold back tears, unprepared for such treatment. He tries to explain, not understanding why he's being met with such hostility. "My mom can't leave the house. She's really sick." But Miss White doesn't seem to be listening at all. Her eyes are cold and disapproving, and without waiting for further explanations, she responds with a blatantly dismissive look. "Too many people pretend to be sick or send children in their place to avoid suspicion. I don't sell medicine to just anyone, especially not to kids who come without adults." Her words hit Jason like a slap. A surge of resentment rises within him, but he doesn't know what to say. He had been entrusted with this important task. He had come to help his mother, only to be met with cold and harsh rejection. In her eyes, he's nobody, just a boy not worth her time. Jason doesn't realize that the reason lies in Miss White's judgment of him solely by his appearance, deeming him unworthy of her care or even simple understanding. He stands before her, clutching the prescription to his chest, while bitterness and a sense of injustice well up in his heart. Despite Miss White's initial words, Jason makes another attempt to explain how important this medicine is. He feels a tension within, but he knows he can't give up now. He needs this medicine for his mother, and he hopes that if he explains the situation, he might be able to elicit at least a bit of sympathy from the pharmacist. "Please, ma'am," he asks softly, trying to sound calm and confident, though his voice betrays a slight tremor. "My mom is really sick, and she really needs this medicine." For a brief moment, Jason thinks his words have reached her, and he feels a glimmer of hope. But Miss White, looking him over, merely presses her lips in disdain. She suspiciously glances at the prescription again, then with a smirk, places it back on the counter in front of Jason, as if it's not a valid document, but a worthless scrap of paper. "So, your mom is sick, huh?" she says with an exaggerated tone of disbelief. Her words sound mocking, and Jason realizes that she doesn't believe him. "Well, maybe she is, but I can't believe every child who comes in here and asks for something, especially with that untrustworthy look." These words frighten and anger the boy even more, but he holds himself back, sensing that arguing will only worsen the situation. He understands that he's facing an adult authority figure, and his words likely won't change her opinion. Yet for his mother's sake, he tries once more. "I'm telling the truth, Miss White," he says, his voice slightly louder, almost pleading. "I just need this medicine so she can feel better." Miss White frowns, and her cold, nearly stern gaze becomes even more distant. She no longer simply doubts him. She's convinced Jason is hiding something. Her tone becomes even sharper. "I don't sell medicine to children without adults," she states firmly. "And if your mother is really sick, then she should come herself to get what she needs. It's not my job to figure out who's telling the truth and who's not. Besides, who sends a child alone for something so important?" Deep down, her words are not driven by concern, but by reproach. She seems to blame Jason for daring to come here, rather than understanding that he simply had no other choice. Jason tries to explain further, but she cuts him off, no longer listening, hiding her true attitude behind a strict mask. Jason realizes that any further attempts would be futile, yet he can't accept this outcome. In her eyes, he sees a cold, almost contemptuous expression, and he understands that her treatment of him is not due to his age, but because of how he looks. To her, he's just a boy from a world foreign to hers, someone who doesn't belong in the pharmacy where she has set her own rules. He looks at Miss White, struggling to hold back tears, but he finds the strength to keep his gaze steady and remains silent. Inside, he feels a growing sense of humiliation, yet he doesn't want to reveal his emotions to her. Jason silently takes back the prescription, his eyes filled with pain and indignation. He has no choice but to turn around and leave the pharmacy, where he's been denied even a trace of compassion, despite the seriousness of his plea. For Miss White, this was just another routine day at work, an ordinary encounter. But for Jason, it was a moment of pain and insult, leaving a deep wound in his heart. He didn't yet know that this humiliation would be noticed and that justice would eventually find its way. Jason leaves the pharmacy feeling broken and empty. He feels bitterness and resentment, but most of all, he worries about his mother. He thinks that now he'll have to go home empty-handed, knowing that the medicine that could ease her suffering remains behind the counter, out of reach due to someone's cruelty and prejudice. As Jason slowly heads toward the door, he hears familiar footsteps behind him. It's his father, Mr. Williams, the pharmacy owner, who has unexpectedly returned early. He already senses that something is wrong. Seeing his son with slumped shoulders and a confused expression, he immediately feels a surge of concern. Jason has always been kind and resilient, but right now, he seems to be going through something particularly difficult. Mr. Williams approaches his son, his eyes filled with worry, and gently places a hand on his shoulder. When Jason sees his father, he realizes he can no longer hold back his feelings. He clings tightly to him, and in that moment, all the tension and hurt spill out. In a whisper, he tells his father what happened, how Miss White refused to sell him medicine for his mother without even listening to his explanation. His voice is filled with anger and disappointment. Mr. Williams listens to his son, and as the story unfolds, his expression gradually changes. He remains composed, but his anger is evident in his tightly pressed lips and intense gaze. Determinedly, he walks over to the counter where Miss White has been standing all this time, unaware of what's happening. She observes the situation with a cold expression, but as she sees Mr. Williams approaching, she visibly tenses. Miss White. Mr. Williams's voice is quiet, but there's a steely firmness in it. I need you to explain what happened here. The pharmacist, realizing that her employer is serious, tries to keep her composure. She quickly starts justifying herself, trying to sound confident. This boy, he came in alone, and I thought I shouldn't sell medicine to children without adults. We can't just trust anyone's word, right? After all, many different types of people come in. She places emphasis on the last phrase, hinting at her prejudice and conviction that the boy couldn't be trusted. However, Mr. Williams hears not just an excuse in her words, but an offensive implication, tainted with bias. He understands that she didn't merely doubt the child. She judged him based on her own prejudices. This boy, Mr. Williams's voice grows colder and more resolute, is not just a customer. He's my son, Jason. Miss White freezes. Her face pales, and for a moment, she is speechless. She realizes that she hasn't just made a mistake. She has committed a blatant injustice, insulting her own employer and his family. Her confidence evaporates instantly, and her face reveals a mix of confusion and fear. You refused my son, Mr. Williams continues, because of your biased views, without even showing him a shred of compassion. You didn't just question his words. You judged him based on what you deemed wrong, simply because he didn't look like you expected. Miss White tries to say something, but she can't find the right words. She understands that no excuse will help her now. Her prejudice, her arrogance, and the humiliation she subjected the boy to now stand before her as proof of her wrongdoing. At that moment, silence falls over the pharmacy, but the tension in the air is almost palpable. Jason, still standing beside his father, for the first time feels that truth and justice are on his side. He sees that his father is ready to stand up for him, and this gives him strength. A heavy silence hangs over the pharmacy. Miss White stands pale and confused, facing Mr. Williams, whose expression is firm and severe. Jason is beside his father, quiet, but now calm and confident. He knows his father will protect him, and that gives him strength. Miss White, realizing that her words can't be taken back, and that there will be consequences for her actions, tries to justify herself. I'm sorry, Mr. Williams. I honestly thought I was doing the right thing. I just wanted to follow the rules and be cautious. You understand? But her words sound unconvincing, as if even she doesn't believe what she's saying. Her voice trembles, and she averts her eyes, knowing that the owner of the pharmacy can see right through her. Mr. Williams, controlling his emotions, looks at her and continues in a calm but firm tone. Rules? What rules are we talking about, Miss White? He pauses, letting the seriousness of the situation sink in. There is one main rule here. Respect for people. We work with people, And our task is to help them, not judge them by their appearance or other biased assumptions. Miss White is silent, not knowing how to respond. She realizes that any further attempts to excuse herself will only make things worse. Her silence confirms her guilt, and Mr. Williams sees this clearly. "You insulted my son and made him feel worthless," he continues. "He had to come here by himself to get help for his sick mother. But instead he was met with humiliation and prejudice. This is unacceptable behavior for an employee in my pharmacy. And if you don't understand what respect means, I'm afraid you won't be staying here." These words sound like a final verdict. Miss White, shocked, stares at him, unable to believe that her actions might cost her job. But she now understands that it is inevitable. She didn't just break trust, she devalued it, and the consequences of her actions cannot be undone. Seeing that Miss White no longer dares to defend herself, Mr. Williams turns to his son. His expression softens, and he places a hand on Jason's shoulder, showing that he is proud of his resilience and courage. He knows how difficult it must have been for the boy to face this humiliation, but he also realizes that through this experience, Jason now understands the true value of respect and justice. "You did the right thing, son," Mr. Williams says quietly, though his voice is strong and assured. "No one has the right to judge you based on appearance or biased assumptions. I'm proud of you for standing up for your right to help your mom." Jason smiles, his eyes shining with gratitude and relief. He feels his father's genuine support, which makes him stronger. His father leads him to the counter, and together they find the necessary medicine. Mr. Williams serves his son himself, symbolizing that justice and respect will always come first in their family. As they leave the pharmacy, Jason glances back at Miss White, who stands with her head down. In her eyes, he sees confusion and regret. Perhaps this incident will serve as a lesson to her, and in the future, she will learn to respect people regardless of their appearance and background. The story ends with father and son, hand in hand, heading home. Jason feels an inner peace and confidence, knowing that truth and justice will always find a way, especially when loved ones stand by, ready to support and protect. This experience leaves a lasting impression on him, becoming an important lesson in self-worth and respect in any situation.